Welcome. Grab your favorite morning beverage and join us for Morning Cannolis with Jim Santel.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother.
Sampling the news desserts of the week, here is your host, Jim Santel.
Good morning. It is Saturday, April 1, and this is the 41st episode of Morning Cannolis. Welcome to our broadcast on what is a modestly snowy morning in downtown Waukesha. This is a production of Civic Media, and although we're coming to you from the studios of WAUK in Waukesha, we are broadcasting through the Civic Media outlets at places throughout the state of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining me at 9 o'clock this morning. We're on the air as always this morning for a couple of hours talking about the major news of the week. Specifically, this is our weekend review, our analysis, our discussion of the most important stories in law, in government, and the aspiration for justice in America. Delighted to have you with me and my ever-faithful and effective and competent and professional producer, Calvin. Together, we're taking your calls here at the studios of WAUK here on our program. That phone number is 844-967-2789. One more time, that phone number, 844-967-2789. My name is Jim Santel. I'm delighted once again that you have chosen to be with me and with Calvin and with some of our listeners who may call in to talk this morning for the next 2 hours about those things that are animating our lives and our livelihoods here in the United States of America and beyond. As always, our syllabus this morning, lots and lots of things to get to, ambitious but achievable, and hopefully for you and anyone else listening, informative and inspiring as well about things that we should do going forward. We always ask about these stories in law, government, and the aspiration for justice in America. 3 fundamental questions. What happened? What do we know with certainty? What are the facts of the case? What do we know as a predicate, a foundational understanding to inform our discussion and our appreciation for the world in which we live? Second, why is that news? Why are those events important? Why should we care about those things? What makes them relevant? What makes them material to our lives and our livelihood? And third, under many circumstances, what should we do? What should we be inspired to do? What are our appropriate responses to the news? Why it's important? What should we do in response, if anything? And most often, when it comes to justice and law and government in America, there are things that we can and should do as animated and concerned residents of the state of Wisconsin, as animated and concerned residents of these United States of America. Typically, at this time in our broadcast, I do a segment called Let's Look Back in History, what happened today in history, and we will be continuing that from time to time on the broadcasts of Morning Cannolis right here on the broadcast studios of WAUK and Civic Media. But this morning on our 41st program, introducing a new segment that will often begin our show. I'm calling it Undiscovered Justice. Undiscovered Justice. Not completely undiscovered, perhaps a little bit of a misnomer, but undiscovered justice in the sense that a story, a major story that may have escaped your attention, perhaps even my attention, until I prepare for our show. A story, a news item that is significant but is below the headlines, maybe even on page 4, 5, 6, maybe not in the pages of our newspapers at all, but nonetheless related to justice and government and the aspiration for the enforcement of law in all of the regions of our lives and livelihoods. Undiscovered Justice, initiating this morning with a story that was, in fact, in the news somewhat, but plainly eclipsed wildly, as you know, by another story coming out of New York and coming out of the East Coast, which we will get to. We will talk about the indictment of the former president in this hour and certainly next, and take your phone calls on that. Before we get to that, let's do some Undiscovered Justice, a story that you probably saw the headlines about, but nonetheless didn't have time, perhaps, didn't have the focus from the media to understand why it is so important. And for this particular story, our initial segment of Undiscovered Justice, we're going to leave our United States of America and go overseas to the Middle East, to our ally, a nation created in the wake of World War II, and that, of course, is Israel. This past week, some very significant things going on with respect to the rule of law the role that Israeli citizens play in creating and in impacting their government in ways that are important to them. And I would offer to us as well some great lessons, not only for the Israelis, but for us right here in America about what happened in Israel in recent weeks, coming to a head and still at a head in that allied nation with us in the Middle East. What happened? Well, we know that several weeks ago, the newly elected and re-elected Prime Minister of the nation, Benjamin Netanyahu, sometimes called Bibi, upon his return to government after being out of government, voted out, his leading party out of power for a period of time, back in government. And we also know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been under investigation, under the cloud, if you will, of prosecution for many, many years, in particular 3 different cases, all alleging various kinds of corruption. That is significant for reasons that I will get to in just a moment or so. But he has come back into office. And again, perhaps a reflection on what may be happening in America too. The fact that you are under charges, under indictment there in Israel does not prevent you from serving in the highest elected office in that land. And that's what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing right now as the leader not only of his party in the parliament, it's called the Knesset, but also plainly as the leader of the Israeli nation at this time. Benjamin Netanyahu, a number of weeks ago, comes back into power and says through his party, that he is going to affect some major reforms when it comes to the judiciary. This Netanyahu plan is in response to what Netanyahu and his affiliates in his ultra-Orthodox political party feel is a Supreme Court and a judicial system generally in the state of Israel, the Republic of Israel, that, as he said, is much too liberal, blocking some of his initiatives, things he wants to do. And so he responds by doing what? He says, you know what, we're going to pass through our Knesset, through the parliament here, a number of reforms based upon our power, because maybe we can, in fact, do it right now. We're going to propose and try to pass some reforms, and that's describing it generously, really attempts to undermine and undercut the legitimacy of an independent judiciary, independent judges and justices in Republic. What in particular does he do? He says that we're going to make the judges, basically subject to our political control, and in particular, the decisions and whims and discretions and judgments of his political party inside the parliament. What in particular? Weakening the independence of those judges. He proposes a number of different things that should be stunning to you, and indeed were stunning to the people, remain stunning to the people of Israel to this day. He says, as a result of the parliamentary coalition that he has put together, he's going to exercise more control over things like appointments to the judiciary, the decisions about who is going to serve as the president of the Supreme Court there. Very significant proposal to implement, according to this Netanyahu plan, a plan to overturn Supreme Court decisions. Not by a vote, which can be done legislatively right here in America, as it can be done there in Israel, but basically by political fiat. The power to overturn Supreme Court decisions with which the ruling party does not agree. A huge, huge problem there. Plans also to override decisions, administrative, others of the government, again, through his political power there in Israel and his position right now as the leader of the political party in the ruling political party in Israel. The question I propose, and the question that great numbers, thousands, millions of Israelis have responded to affirmatively is, what does that mean to you? What does that mean when a leader of a government, our government, the Israeli government at this point in its history, says, I'm going to change the balance of power. I'm going to affect the balance of power between, and yes, they've got the same sort of system that we have, a balance between an executive branch, which really is the prime minister, the legislative branch, which is the inside, also the prime minister is inside, of course, the Knesset, but has these great executive powers, and also the legislative power, the Knesset itself, and the judiciary, the balance that goes on between those three, the checks and balances that we know well. Our system, again, we don't have a parliament here in the United States, but many countries countries do, and all of them fundamentally premised upon this notion of an independent judiciary that can make decisions, can review cases, and issue rulings, as we have talked a lot on this program about the important issues in what? In healthcare, in academics, in commerce, in politics, in voting, all kinds of things out there, in the arts, for example, in the environment, all kinds of things, economics, that are important to all of us. The notion that a judicial branch is independent is fundamental. It's basic to any republic, any Western, any Eastern republic that values the rule of law on the face of our planet. And so Netanyahu's plan to undermine that, to pull back and basically to consolidate power, to tell the judiciary what it is and is not going to be doing, to unilaterally, through the exercise of his power in the Knesset, through his present role as the prime minister, to overrule those decisions, to tell them what their leadership is all about, plainly to rein them in if in fact they do things that he does not like. That is more than a check. That's more than a balance to it. That is the usurpation of judicial authority and the exercise of authority in an executive way over an independent branch of government. When I was in Iraq, a huge amount of focus on the notion of an emerging judiciary that had to be independent. Yes, there too of the parliament, and they also have a parliament in the Republic today. They pursue that mechanism, that reestablished form of government after Saddam Hussein. A huge amount of time that we spent ensuring that the judiciary is independent. Why? So that as that young, now reemerging republic called Iraq makes decisions about its future, it can do so with appropriate balances between the branches of government, ensuring that the parliament does not tell the judiciary what to do and invades that independent authority. All of that then going on in the Republic of Israel in recent weeks, not without pushback. And we know, for example, that the defense minister, Netanyahu's own defense minister, came forward and said, you know what, this should not happen, or at least there should be a pause put on it until we can thoughtfully think about it more. And right after this break, we're going to talk more about what happened to that defense minister, and more significantly for the rule of law this morning on Undiscovered Justice, this segment, what it means for us. Stay with us for that all-important discussion. We are back in this next segment of Morning Cannolis. Thank you for joining me so very much on this Saturday morning, April 1, when we're talking, as always, this hour and next hour, but major stories, major news in law, in government, and the aspiration for justice in America. Inaugurating this morning, as I did right before the first break here, a new segment which we're going to visit from time to time down the road called Undiscovered Justice, our analysis of a story that may not have captured the full headlines that it otherwise should. And this morning, talking about what's happening in Israel right now and this attempt by the present prime minister, his name is Benjamin Netanyahu, to overtake the judicial system, undermine its authority, and to put in place some prerogatives of his own party and of his own prerogative to make decisions about what the judiciary should and should not do, appointments, overruling decisions, impacting the independence of the judiciary there in the Republic of Israel. Netanyahu, of course, also probably doing this, not only because of his view that the Supreme Court and other judges there in Israel, much too liberal, as he says, and therefore not supporting him in the things that he wants to do, his ultra-Orthodox political party wants to do. But also, as we know, he is facing some very serious corruption charges there, a package of 3 cases bundled together now in front of the judiciary. And it may well be that Netanyahu's overall purpose, if in fact this plan goes ahead, would be to block the ability of the judiciary to adjudicate his case, at a minimum to declare him unfit for office, which is something that the judiciary there could do. So again, an attempt by the prime minister not only to impact the judiciary and its prerogatives, its independence, perhaps also to put himself in a position where he will not be facing the kinds of criminal charges that, again, anyone should face. Again, shades of what's going on right now in America, right? So what happened? And why is this story so important? Again, it's been in the news, but again, eclipsed by other things going on this past week in our own nation, certainly eclipsed by the major news media and their attention to a singular story that we will, in fact, get to later in this hour and next as well. What happened? Well, people responded. People responded in Israel and said, no, we're not going to do that. I am reminded, as I looked at the story of what's happening the last several weeks, continuing this week and probably into next week, of the infamous line in William Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2. For those of you who are purists, it's in Act 4, Scene 2. You've got a sort of a rough and tumble character named Dick the Butcher, who, along with other authorities, is planning to overthrow the throne, kind of a band of pretenders, and talks about improving the country by doing what? He says, let's kill all the lawyers. The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers, and sometimes interpreted to be simply another variation on a joke about lawyers, which sometimes are humorous. Acknowledging that completely as a lawyer myself. This quote, however, misinterpreted to be a joke about lawyers, just the opposite, actually. What Shakespeare was talking about is this notion that if indeed you undermine the lawyers, and I would offer that that's simply a euphemism, sort of a singular word for the system of rule of law, judges, justices, law enforcement, the ways that things should work to ensure the delivery of fair justice. Yes, indeed, Henry the Sixth reign, others there in the admittedly somewhat fictitious, but nonetheless premised on history, time of Henry VI. What is the notion that Dick the Butcher is advocating? We get rid of the justice system, we get rid of judges, we get rid of lawyers as well, we get rid of all the trappings of that, and we can do what we want. We can finally establish, we can overthrow the throne, we can overthrow the trappings of government and put ourselves, the henchmen that we are. He was, in fact, a killer, as his name implies, Dick the Butcher. We can put ourselves in power and usurp the authority of the established regime. By what? By getting rid of the judiciary. And I would offer that while the comparison between Dick the Butcher and the Prime Minister of Israel is at best strained, do not mean to make that comparison directly. The reality is that that's what's animating. That's what's happening here. And it was what the Israeli citizenry responded to last week and probably going forward as well. What happened? Well, just before the break, I said that the defense minister came forward and said, you know what, we can't do this. I'm a part of government. I understand the rule of law. I understand the importance of having judges who are independent and a Supreme Court that make decisions about the entitlement, the ability, the capacity, if you will, of the prime minister to be fit or unfit for office. He gets all that. And what happens, of course, is that Netanyahu says, all right, for saying that, I'm firing you. I'm terminating your role. Again, the kind of thing that someone who's out to undermine government generally by establishing all power in himself, perhaps herself as well. That's the kind of thing you do. Once again, you kill the speakers of those kinds of advocacy in the opposite direction. His particular role, that is the defense minister's role, may somewhat still be up for grabs, if you will, somewhat subject to review, but he did that. And in the wake of that, and even before that, again, what happened and why is this story in this segment we're calling Undiscovered Justice so very, very important? Because it is a symbol, a sign, an illustration of what people in a republic can and should do when their government attempts to undermine the basic tenets, the fundamental trappings of their government. Now, in Israel, unlike the United States, there is not a constitution. They've got a parliamentary system. And for that reason, the role of the judges in the Supreme Court is especially important. They don't have a Bill of Rights to look to. And so what they do look to are all sorts of rules and regulations and laws and opinions that are codified by the judges, making the role in the Republic of Israel, the country, the nation of Israel, all the more important. And what the people of Israel said was no, Mr. Prime Minister, we're not going to let you do this. And what they said was, not only are we not going to let you do this, but we're going to take to the streets and we're going to protest. Millions and millions of people last week and probably continuing this week, went out into the streets, not simply protesting with signs and moving up and down streets, but basically shutting the nation down. But after this break, I'm going to talk about the final segment here, what happened in Israel and lessons we draw from what happened there and the pushback by independent people in Israel to ensure the future of their nation. Back again this morning, April 1 in the United States of America, talking, however, this morning in our news segment called Undiscovered Justice about what's going on in Israel as an important rule of law story, a lesson, some guidance, if you will, for the United States of America as well. Because what happened in the past couple of weeks among and coming out of the outrage by the Israeli population took to the streets in protest, yes. No belief that there was a violent protest, but what did they do in response to Benjamin Netanyahu's proposal to affect the balance of power between the judiciary and his own party in the Knesset, his own position under indictment, under charges for corruption there? The Israeli population rose up and said, no, we're not going to tolerate that. We're not going to tolerate your termination of the defense minister who spoke about justice and getting rid of him just because of his advocacy in favor of the right thing. We are going to prevent you from doing this. And sure enough, what did they do? They went out into the streets and more. They blocked the highways of major places throughout this important nation. They burned bonfires in Tel Aviv, some main arteries in and out. Again, no one harmed, but nonetheless stopping the flow of commerce, of traffic in and around and through Tel Aviv, stopped the operation of Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, closed the airport down from international and national travel. How stunning is that? There were national strikes from major businesses, commercial entities around the country. Hospitals, medical providers, healthcare providers canceled anything but the most important surgeries and procedures. Non-urgent elective measures canceled as a result of this. Schools and universities around the country likewise closed, not only to indicate their outrage for what is happening at the hands of Benjamin Netanyahu, but also to signal the support that the judiciary has among their group. The military reservists threatened not to be available if there was an event that required their involvement. All these things and more. Take a look at the photographs. Take a look at some of the reporting on this story coming out of Israel about how the people said, you know what, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to let it happen. And indeed, by virtue of their very strong, nonviolent, admittedly very strong and very clear and very articulate and very powerful response to this proposal to undermine the judiciary in Israel. What happened? Benjamin Netanyahu backed down. He said, you know what? Okay, let's put this on hold, which is his way of saying, you've got me. You have told me that this is not going to happen. And even somebody who may have had the votes to do this in the parliament, he's established a coalition there. A big question about whether that's true or not, given the pushback by the Israeli citizenry. But even if he could have done it, he was wise enough, probably based upon some of his counselors as well, inside his own very ultra-Orthodox political party, wise enough to understand he was not going to be able to go forward with this, and suspended all of this and prevented the usurpation by his forces of the judiciary, made that an event, a circumstance, a proposal that at least for today, at least for today, is no longer on the table in Israel. He simply said we're suspending it, going to engage in talks with the other side, which perhaps once again is political speak for recognizing that this cannot happen. Unbelievable, a very strong and articulate way of understanding the power of the population to respond to things that government does that are inappropriate and contrary to the basic core values of the nation. I'm not talking necessarily about differences of policy, but when the very core of government is threatened, as it is in this case, the response by the Israeli people was, I would offer to you a really compelling, telling instruction about how all Americans should also respond if indeed in the prior administration, perhaps in a future administration also, threats to our very democracy that we saw on January 6th, threats to our democracy to this day that continue, things we need to be thoughtful about, asking, as I have before, what are we prepared to do? What are the Israelis prepared to do to ensure the future of their nation? What are we prepared to do to ensure the integrity, the future of our republic as well? Interestingly, the footnote to all of this, of course, it has caused some diplomatic dust-ups between the Israeli nation and our nation. Mr. Netanyahu is scheduled to come to the United States. The president of our nation, Joe Biden, saying let's not invite him right now, sending some signals, some strong signals, clearly articulating his view that what's happening there in Israel should not be happening. And all of that, again, causing some diplomatic dust-up. I would offer that the more important issue is what the Israeli people themselves did. In an accidental twist of timing, Mr. Netanyahu, just on Wednesday, participated virtually in something called the Summit for Democracy, co-hosted by the United States. And here is what he said. Netanyahu said, he described Israel as a beacon of liberty and shared prosperity in the heart of the Middle East. You may have noticed Israel is undergoing, in its robust democracy, a very intensive public debate. This is Netanyahu now speaking. And the debate is, how do we ensure a proper democracy? Absolutely, Mr. Prime Minister. Democracy, he said, means the will of the people as expressed by majority, and it also means protection of civil rights, individual rights. It's the balance between the two. Glad you understand that, Mr. Prime Minister. Hopefully, as we go forward with this story here on our new segment called Undiscovered Justice, that will animate what goes on in Israel and also some great, unmistakable lessons for what we're doing right here in the United States of America. This morning, delighted, as always, to have your calls about this issue. And yes, we're going to get to many others here on our Saturday morning broadcast. Let's take some of those callers right now. Gary from Madison, glad to have you with us. Gary, your thought, your comment, your question.
You know, a little bit off subject, but the same subject. What's the difference between parliamentary Congress versus our Congress here in the United States? Without going too deep, is there a big difference? Is there advantages to have? I know Britain has parliamentary,
right.
And now is that a good thing? I mean, from what you know,
Sure.
parliamentary versus what we have here, a little difference. Thank you.
It is
That's
very great civics question, Gary. And you know what? We're going to chat about that perhaps down the road as well. The very simple and therefore very superficial answer. Also a part of a republic, right? An elective democracy or a republic where people's voices are heard. Their parliament is not exactly like our Congress, but has very similar roles to play. One of the significant differences, of course, is it's out of the parliament that we get the executive component, if you will. Benjamin Netanyahu, again, in power because his political party, this ultra-Orthodox party, is in power right now, or at least he's able to establish a government with his power, his party, and others. And they then, by virtue of his being the leader of the party, becomes also the prime minister. So a different process, but nonetheless, fundamentally, the Knesset there, similar in many ways to what our legislature does in Congress, passing laws, making decisions about how the country is going to be run and operated. The parliamentary procedure, plainly, much older than ours. Ours, of course, the Congress, a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate, tracked pretty much by most states in the Union as well, but much younger than parliaments around the country and around the world, rather, and in countries around the world. And we'll talk more about that very good question down the road. But again, fundamentally a sign of a republic that does respond to the elected population out there. The elected population does send members of its own groups, if you will, to that parliament. and they then make decisions about what happens. Great question. Dana from La Crosse, also with us this morning. Glad to have you with us, Dana.
Good morning, Jim. Pleasure to be with you this morning. Say, you're talking about the power of people and protest and what that can do. I'm reminded of a story I heard yesterday, what's happening down in Texas, in Harris County. I don't know if you've heard of it, but their legislature down there in Texas is pushing through bills to allow them to essentially, for just Harris County only, and as we all know, it's the biggest county down there in Houston, and they're going to have the power to just turn over an election if they don't like it and say, let's do it again. Fire election workers if they just don't like them, in other words, if they're a Democrat.
Right.
This is a flagrant abuse of our Constitution. I don't know how it can stand. It's easy to say, well, let's get out there and protest. But at the same time, Jim, they're passing laws that turn protests into felonies and terrorism charges. And I mean, what can we do?
Right.
We just can't keep waiting for elections and to slowly turn the tide that way.
Right. And I'm not making the advocacy this morning, of course, for out-and-out insurrection. We saw how that played out on January 6th. But this notion, once again, that all of us have some responsibility. A great point, Dana. In Harris County, of course, that is indeed going on. A legislative, again, usurpation, an invasion into other areas which should not be happening. And that's not going on just in Harris County, Dana, as you well know. It's going on around the country. We know about these Supreme Court cases pending right now before the United States Supreme Court, attempts out of states under this independent state legislature theory to advance the notion that legislatures have decisions when it comes to elective politics and who wins elections. That's right before our Supreme Court right now, coming out of North Carolina. All kinds of things like that. Again, the example of Israel reflected also in our own nation. And if nothing more, Dana, when we see these things in Harris County, other places around our nation, sometimes very close to home, we should ask the question, what are we prepared to do? It may well be nothing. We cannot, because of our circumstances, do anything. At the far extreme, of course, is violence, which we do not advocate for under any circumstances. What is that middle ground? What are you prepared to do to ensure that things like the things that happen in Harris County, the things that happen, frankly, in Israel don't happen? We know what the answer of the Israelis was, which was, we're not going to stand for it. We're going to shut the country down and compel our own government, which we have elected, to respond better. Great point, great observation. Appreciate that call. And Joe, also appreciate your calling in this morning from Madison. Glad to have you with us once again, Joe. Your thoughts or comments about our issue or others this morning on our broadcast.
Already a great discussion for setting up, and I think the line, what are we prepared to do, is one that we should return to again and again in future shows. Thank you for the discussion of Dick the Butcher. The line, first we kill all the lawyers, I've always thought was a Shakespeare line. You're killing your firewall. You're killing your only protection that you have against brutality. You also used a line recent in this discussion where you said democracy as expressed by the majority. We don't have that right now because of gerrymandering, which sets up the question about the upcoming Supreme Court race. And I wanted to ask your opinion about one aspect of that, which has been an ad that has, and maybe you were going to be coming into this in the next hour, I don't know, but an ad that took the words of a woman who had been raped and her case was settled, adjudicated in a Protasevich court, and the Republican dark money group used the words that she had to craft an ad to support Dan Kelly, which is absolutely antithetical to what this one woman wanted. She was happy with the sentence that Judge Protasevich had handed down in the rape case. It was a lighter sentence of 5 years, but this woman was a proponent of restorative justice and didn't want any sentence for this guy at all besides probation and restorative justice. Protasevich said that's not enough. He's got to serve some time. And this woman was approached by people from the Dan Kelly campaign and just said, I don't want to be involved in an ad for Dan Kelly. I don't support him. They took her words. They created an ad that was in support of Dan Kelly. And she said they just lied within this ad. What recourse does she have if she seeks to go? I understand it can't. You could maybe ask stations to pull this ad before the election occurs, but what other legal recourse does she have after the election concludes to say, you took my words, you took me, you took my story, you gutted me and opened me up to once again having to relive this situation in my life by this ad that you created against my will. Does she have any recourse? Does she have a recourse under fraud? If you could expand on that sometime during the hour and a half that's left in the show, I'd really appreciate it, Jim. I think it's an awful situation, and I can't imagine any woman and their friends and family having to endure this. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'll await your answer.
Absolutely, Joe. Important observation. What do we do, again, to preserve even the integrity of our elective process? Right after this break, the last segment of our first hour here, I'm going to take that on, Joe, and talk about that as we move again into other stories affecting our lives. Thank you so much for that call. All our callers this morning at 844-967-2789.
I'll be holding on, go to the memory.
We are back in this last segment of our first hour here on Morning Cannolis, our examination, our discussion of law, government, and the aspiration for justice in America. Right before the break, this terrific question, this terrific observation by our caller, Joe, calling in today to talk about, again, this broad question: what are you prepared to do to ensure the future of your nation? What are you prepared to do when you see something in even our elective politics, our campaigns, that is so offensive and so completely contrary to the truth and to the fundamental ways in which we do things in America? What is your remedy? And Joe was talking in particular before the break about this woman, the victim of rape, and her case, again, adjudicated in the courtroom of Wisconsin Circuit Court Judge Janet Protasiewicz. To her credit, this particular victim says, I believe strongly in restorative justice, which is this notion that as a part of the remedy for crime, there's engagement between victims and plaintiff and defendants, an attempt to restore, obviously imperfectly, a sense of balance, of understanding, of community, of humanity, and that the criminal justice system that is certainly embracing that notion, but nonetheless has before its tools like incarceration, isn't always the answer, or isn't always the exclusive answer. This particular woman, again, advocating for that, Janet Protasiewicz, coming back and saying, yes, I appreciate that. I embrace that too. That notion there should be communication and understanding about healing in this case and others, but nonetheless imposes a criminal sentence in this case. The words taken from this particular victim and used in this campaign by Janet Protasiewicz's opponent to suggest that, in fact, Janet Protasiewicz was not, in fact, pursuing the rule of law in the adjudication of this case. The question Joe asked was, what do you do about that? What are the remedies available? Once again, what can you do? What is my response to that when I see those kinds of things to preserve the integrity of our process? A number of things, Joe, that I would offer. Number one, of course, is advocacy in the public domain. And I know that sounds like the simple thing to do, but getting out there, talking about the news, talking about why this is so incredibly offensive, not only to the elective process, but also to truth. And having that woman, that victim, that wonderfully insightful and humane person coming forward and specifically denouncing the use of her own words and her own situation by a candidate. The public response to that, just like it is in Israel, these other things, should be strong and unequivocal, requires some education, right? Second, there's a thing called the Wisconsin Election Commission. And they're responsible for, that's a bipartisan, nonpartisan group, if you will, that is responsible for reviewing not only the regulatory matters of the elections here in Wisconsin. This bipartisan group addressing the issues of elections and processes, complaints to that group to ensure that the process is pursued with integrity. They do, in fact, take those kinds of complaints on a regular basis. And then a perfect segue, Joe, into what I was going to chat about next, and so appreciate the call for that reason. There's also this thing out there called defamation, right? It is the purposeful knowing, intentionally stating something in the public domain that you know is false and doing it with the intent to harm. With respect to public figures, a different standard. We've talked a lot about that in the context of the Dominion lawsuit recently that is in the news once again. But that notion that if you have said something that has compromised my integrity, my position, the understanding that people have of me in the community, there is a remedy in the civil courts to present that and to offer to a judge or a jury the evidence of the harm that has been caused by that particular misstatement, that complete misconstruction of what I am, of what I've said, of what I've done. And damages are possible. Damages, monetary damages, injunctive relief, perhaps also compelling the defendant in a case like that from doing it ever again, all kinds of things. Declaratory judgment, declaring simply that the offense conduct happened and that it's not to be believed. So all kinds of remedies out there. Again, coming out of the good question that you have reinforced, Joe, this morning about what are we prepared to do when we see these kinds of things. Public advocacy, going to the agencies responsible for our elections. Certainly pursuing, and this is what does keep lawyers in business as well, not killed by virtue of Dick the Butcher, but lawyers who are active in ensuring that the rule of law is supported. All great important points, and leading, as I suggested, into one of the other stories also here on the broadcast stations of civic media about Dominion voting machines just this past week. The judge presiding over the case doing a couple of very important things. First, denying in part, granting in part, motions for summary judgment, which again, as you heard in the news, this notion that not the facts of the case are clear, and for that reason, the law also clear, and we don't need to go to trial. Well, the judge basically said that I'm going to split this down the middle, if you will, a little bit. He found expressly that the statements made by Fox News on its on-air talent about Dominion and about the big lie, all of that, clearly, crystal clear, he said, that those statements, those representations by Fox News that we now know based upon the discovery in this case, said unequivocally those were false, untrue, lies, if you will, perpetrated by Fox News in the public domain, said undeniably that is my finding as a rule of law, as a premise of the facts of this case. And then decided not to go the next step, which is what Dominion wanted him to do, and said, you know what, I'm not going to find, however, that even based upon those false statements, whether there was defamation, whether there was such a compromise in the integrity of the Dominion voting machines company, I'm going to leave that to a finder of fact, a jury, and indeed, that's what he did. He will be giving them an instruction, of course, that his finding is that these statements, which you're going to hear about during the course of the trial, members of the jury, these are false. These are not true. You should know that as a matter of law and fact. Your question then is whether or not, by virtue of articulating, by voicing those false things repeatedly on the airwaves coming out of Fox News, did that accomplish a defamation, a degradation of the reputation of Dominion voting machines and the company in the public domain? Was there actual malice, the purposeful intent to do this with the purpose of damaging, willfully, knowingly doing exactly what the allegations in this civil complaint are? The judge just this past week, again, an important ruling finding that these statements are false and scheduling this matter on then for trial when coming up in just a few short weeks, going to be impaneling a jury. And with as much as the upcoming proceedings, which we're going to talk about after the break in New York, are going to be fascinating going forward, the trial to watch next month. This judge is also crystal clear that he's going ahead with this trial, is the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News. Testimony presumably by lots and lots of people, by Dominion, explaining what it is that is true and what isn't, again, premised fundamentally on the notion the judge has already decided that issue. These are false statements by Fox, and explaining then the ways in which those statements defamed, compromised, damaged Dominion and its voting machine practices. When we come back, more news of rule of law, justice, and government America. Stay with us for that and much more here on Morning Cannolis.
Welcome. Grab your favorite morning beverage and join us for Morning Cannolis with Jim Santel.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother.
Sampling the news desserts of the week, here is your host, Jim Santel.
Welcome indeed to the second hour of our broadcast on this beautiful Saturday morning, April 1, in Wisconsin, in the United States of America, on the face of our planet. As always, talking with you, talking about the major stories in law, government, and the aspiration for justice in America. Delighted to have you with us on this second hour of our broadcast this morning, spending most of our first hour talking about the lessons to be pulled from, to be gleaned from what's going on in Israel right now, having to do with its own challenges when it comes to the rule of law, separation of powers, the role of the judiciary, and the attempts by the leadership, the Prime Minister there in particular, to overturn, to undermine the judiciary going forward, the stopping of that by the very populists who plainly responding to what this attempt is all about and saying no. In this hour, yes, we're going to get back to the major story percolating up and out of New York this past week, having to do with the announced indictment of the former President Donald Trump by Alvin Bragg, who's the DA of Manhattan. We're also going to spend some time talking about other issues in this hour related to the implementation of justice in America, announcement about the suit by the Justice Department, a civil lawsuit against Norfolk Southern for the horrific spill in East Palestine. We're going to talk about another major story coming out of a federal judge who has decided that preventive care aspects of Obamacare are unconstitutional. The appeal certainly going forward on that. And then also going to talk about abortion once again, a significant ruling coming out of the state of New Mexico, affirming the privacy right to an abortion based upon that state's posturing and its position when it comes to privacy rights and rights to reproductive options in that state. Lots more coming up here on Morning Cannolis. Thank you once again for joining me. Callers always welcome at 844-967-2789. And let's begin with some callers this morning as we get into first this major story about the Trump indictment, other things. Gary, your comment, your question, your thought coming in to us from Sussex.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jim, for taking my call. I just want to know, and I've talked to you before.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely. Glad to have you back.
Well, I listen to you. Sometimes I just can't talk because I'm going between my jobs, and
sure.
I just don't have enough time. But I do listen between. I'm just wondering, and this is just when I base my opinion. It's just my opinion. It's not fact. It's how I look at life. Okay?
That's what America's all about. We exercise our right to speak freely, right? Absolutely.
Right. So my point is, I think if for the Democrats, what they should do is this. They should get Biden to go out there and publicly say that this is a witch hunt against my political rival. He would boost his popularity a lot with at least some Republicans, very few, but a lot of independents. But by him keeping his mouth shut, because he knows this is going to bite him in the butt. If they go in, and which they already did, indicted him, and if they go on with this thing, the Republicans are going to go nuts, and they're going to start going after everybody, his family, his brother, his son, and all sorts of stuff. This is going to open a can of worms like we've never seen before. And in my opinion, before Trump, things were pretty civil. But when Trump was elected president, before he even served a day as the president, which there was a month and a half between the election or whatever, 2 months, right, the transition period, they were out to get him the very next day. And to me, it just shows people like myself that this is, like, I hate to use the word witch hunt, but that's what it looks like to me. Okay. Now, as of a couple of weeks ago,
I would
And
support
Gary, you're
it.
breaking up a little bit, having some difficulty hearing you, but let me comment on that. And again, important to understand we all have views on these kinds of things. Again, plainly, the president and other people have the obligation, I would say, to talk about the integrity of our systems, including the judiciary. And where I would part company with you, again, respectfully, is that for the president or anyone to come out and say that this indictment of the president, which we're going to talk about in just a few moments here, is a witch hunt as a way of accomplishing some political advantage, I don't think that's wise. And I don't think for him politically, more importantly, it is contrary to what's really going on here. What happened here, as we know, and we'll get into the story, Gary, and I appreciate the comment or the question, it's just this, that we have a grand jury. What is a grand jury? They're not witch hunters. They're people who are brought together to review evidence. In this case, a grand jury in Manhattan. They review this for a number of months going on there in Manhattan under the supervision of the court to ensure that there's integrity there. They hear evidence, they review documents, testimony, all those kinds of things. And what they do in the end is determine whether there is probable cause. That's our system of justice in America and in New York as well, to determine whether or not there's probable cause to return charges. Not proof beyond a reasonable doubt at this point. But what happened, of course, what it was announced by Alvin Bragg, the DA, just this past week, is that independent grand jury found probable cause to believe that indeed there's a basis to charge the former president, perhaps others, we don't know, we haven't seen the indictment yet, with crimes under the state of New York's code. That's a process that we can embrace, not a witch hunt, but a process that is premised upon 240 years of history here in our nation. And while I recognize, Gary, again, a good statement about your own opinion on this, we can talk about that process without suggesting that somehow it has been undermined or is the product of politics. It is not. It is not and has not been. Our system is that this gets tried now. We assume that as in all situations where a defendant is charged, which Mr. Trump now is, presumption of innocence attends him until that time, if ever, as a trial jury hearing the evidence in public finds beyond a reasonable doubt that these particular offense conduct, as described in this indictment, has in fact been proven by the government. What happened? Let's talk about that, Gary, based upon your invocation of this, of your good question here. The indictment handed out, again, by this grand jury. Important to note at the top, we don't know exactly what it says. Some references in the media to there being 34 particular counts. It stems probably from this investigation being conducted by the grand jury into a payment that was made to this woman named Stormy Daniels, October 2016, during the final weeks of the presidential campaign at that time, trying to sell her story of an affair with Trump. Daniels' representatives had contacted the National Enquirer, offering exclusive rights to her story. David Pecker, who at that time was the tabloid's publisher, longtime ally of Trump, agreed to look out for potentially damaging stories about Trump during that campaign. At one point, apparently even agreed to buy the story of another woman's affair with Trump and never publish it, a practice name called Catch and Kill. Didn't purchase the story. Instead, he and the tabloid's top editor helped broker a separate deal between Mr. Cohen, Michael Cohen, who again, as we all know well, is the president's fixer, so to speak, his lawyer, and Daniels' lawyer. Cohen paid $130,000. Trump later reimbursed him from his own, presumably the election funds, the campaign funds at the time. Cohen pleaded guilty to charges including federal campaign finance crimes. The payment, federal prosecutors conclude in that federal case, amounted to an improper donation to Trump's campaign. Federal case, what's happening now in New York is plainly a state incarnation, based presumably on the same facts. We don't know exactly, but presumably premised upon the notion that Trump's company somehow falsely accounted for these monthly payments, through Cohen, his legal expenses, and that the company records cited a retainer agreement that was probably almost certainly false. That is what Cohen has testified to in front of the grand jury and others as well. Importantly, we know in New York, falsifying business records can amount to a crime, albeit usually it's a misdemeanor. And significantly, again, we'll see what happens as it's released this coming Tuesday, to elevate the crime to a felony charge. the prosecutor, Bragg in this case, has to show that Trump's conduct included an intent to defraud, and that included an attempt to commit or conceal a second crime. Lots of things stacked one on top of another. And so we've got a lot to take a look at when it comes to the likely, almost certainly, announcement of this indictment on Tuesday. We know that Tuesday early afternoon in the southern tip of Manhattan, the former president will appear in a state courtroom there, and he will be arraigned on whatever these charges are all about. At that time, we will see what this indictment says. We'll see what these 33, 34, 35 charges are all about. Could be some speculation on my part here that it is premised, again, principally upon this catch and kill, this hush money arrangement, but could be other matters as well. We just don't know what the grand jury, which appropriately conducts its business in private. We don't know exactly what its focus has been. We know that there has been a document returned, again, remaining under seal. It is not yet in the public domain. Will be announced at the time of the arraignment, and plainly sometime Tuesday afternoon, we will all see what those charges are all about. Again, charges in a state system, not a federal system, for the offense conduct in the grand jury product, which is that indictment. We know that Mr. Trump then will appear, and the judge presiding over this matter will do things like accept his plea, presumably entered by Mr. Trump and his lawyers, a plea of not guilty. That preserves, obviously, his right to go to trial and to contest, as I said before, the allegations in the indictment. The presumption of innocence stays with him, very important to note, until, once again, there was a finding by a trial jury, not a grand jury, a trial jury, unanimously, beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't know when that will happen. Predictably, probably years down the road. Why? Because in the wake of this arraignment, this announcement of the offense conduct, the specific charges in the indictment, the judge will set deadlines for the filing of motions to dismiss, motions for suppression of evidence, motions about all kinds of things leading up to a trial. He may or may not establish a trial date on Tuesday. Presumably we'll have many pretrial conferences and status conferences along the way. And at some point down the road, sometime down the road, there will likely be a trial on these charges in Manhattan, prosecuted by Alvin Bragg's prosecutors, by those folks presenting this evidence of the charges in this indictment. Lots more history on this particular case and plainly others, which we will talk about, not only on this broadcast, but in other times in the days ahead. Stay with us right after this break for more comments from you and also more commentary about the rule of law in America. Thank you for continuing to join me and my producer, Calvin, here at the studios of WAUK Radio. This is a production of Civic Media, as you know. Throughout the state of Wisconsin, we're talking this morning in this particular segment about the other major news story coming out of our nation and our planet, which is the announcement of the Trump indictment by the DA in Manhattan. Right before the break, talking about what that might or might not be all about, and focusing in particular upon, again, the rule of law. Why is this important? Because this is the process by which we bring people to justice. This is a criminal proceeding. It's not a civil proceeding. We know well that the former president is facing many other civil charges out there, including this major $250 million civil lawsuit that's being brought by another New York official. Her name is Letitia James. She is the Attorney General of the state of New York. Alvin Bragg, the DA of Manhattan, two different people, two different jurisdictions, if you will. Letitia James alleging that the Trump organization and the Trump individuals, the Trump family members, including the former president and his children, engaged in all sorts of financial conduct, once again, improperly valuing properties, engaging in financial misconduct, all sorts of things related to the management of the Trump books and finances that are contrary, she alleges, to basic New York law. She is seeking not only to prohibit the Trumps from ever once again being involved in any businesses or corporations in New York, but also seeking fines against him of, again, about $250 million. That lawsuit, that civil lawsuit, again, proceeding ahead, even as this coming week, Donald Trump, for the first time in his life, is facing criminal charges, again, coming out of this offense conduct before he was elected president, right before his election in 2016, hush money paid through the conduit of his at that time fixer and lawyer Michael Cohen to keep women quiet about the affairs that he had. My own view and the view of many people out there is that it's not only a state violation, arguably, we'll see what Alvin Bragg tells us, but also a federal violation of federal election laws. Why? Because you're compromising the capacity of people to know about things that are significant to their vote. Doing so probably in violation of the financial aspects, rules and regulations imposed upon a campaign, using monies in that case, again, to engage not only in this particular hush money approach, but also to do it in a way that is contrary to our public visibility about monies in that type of setting. And so lots of people out there believing, once again, that the federal government should have also charged this, but it did not happen. And plainly going ahead this coming week with the state charges premised upon the same factual predicates. We've got Dick calling in from Madison. Dick, thanks again for calling in this morning. Always glad to have your thoughts or your perspectives.
I saw a poll early this week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, that said that 57% of people believe Trump, if indicted, should not be able to run again. That said, I don't understand the party that here's the guy's resume. I mean, he's up against this hush money thing, the situation with Georgia, the mishandling of documents, we don't know about that yet, impeached twice, lost a popular vote twice, the January insurrection, lost the House, lost the Senate, and potentially many more legal cases. Why would you want him, under any circumstance, to be the guy that carries the torch for your party? I don't get it.
Right. And a rhetorical question, certainly, Dick, but a good one, right? To ask anybody in the political realm, why is this your standard bearer? Why is this a person who you believe should be elected to the position of the most powerful person on the face of the planet, in charge of the executive branch, in charge of our nation in many ways, big and small? As you indicated, well over half the people in America think he should not be able to run again. I'm going to seize upon that particular observation as well and say, you know what, as you appreciate, Dick, and others do, under the Constitution, the way that James Madison wrote it, there are basically three qualifications. You have to have lived in our country for a while. You have to be naturally born here, and you have to be more than 35 years old. Well, it turns out that Donald Trump qualifies on all three of those grounds. No other rules and regulations in our Constitution, so he can run. And he is running, as we know. Nothing to prevent him from continuing to run, even as he is under these federal charges. Dick, you did a great job of summarizing all the other things out there: civil cases, criminal cases, federal cases, state cases, all kinds of things. We didn't even talk about the E. Jean Carroll matter. All sorts of other things that are out there facing him and putting him in peril, but also sending, Dick, to your issue, this message that this is not the kind of person who should be in the presidency. It is, as I've said in the past, from my perspective, an embarrassment historically that our nation, in the times in which we live right now, sent this man to the White House initially. As you indicated, did not win either popular vote, but enough electoral votes in 2016 to capture the White House legitimately and lawfully. Followed that up by engaging in obstruction of justice during the course of his first months. Concluded his term by attempting to mount an insurrection, overturning the results of that. Brings these documents even upon his departure from the White House. Brings those to Mar-a-Lago. Probably crimes there. Certainly improprieties in management of those documents. All kinds of things out there. And Dick, once again, your advocacy regardless of politics, regardless of what one thinks about the policies that he may or may not bring to that position, why is it that this is the kind of person, given the other folks who are out there who could be in positions on both sides of the political aisle, Republicans, Democrats, independents, members of other parties, why is this the person? Why is this the person who should and may well be, even as he's under indictment, it may well be that in the coming calendar year, the next 18 months or so, he could well be the nominee of the Republican Party, once again, to face presumably Joe Biden in the Democratic side of things for the presidency in 2024. Stunning, stunning development. And the underlining of that this week, that for the first time in history, we now have a president who is going to be under criminal charges. We're going to talk about a collateral aspect of that, but after the break and take more callers here on Morning Cannolis. Stay with us for all of that discussion and more.
I'd like to hear some funky Dixieland, pretty mama, gonna take me by the hand.
We are back for the final segments in this half hour of Morning Cannolis, and talking right now about what is undeniably the biggest news story coming out of New York this past week, and that is the indictment of the former president, Donald Trump, his arraignment scheduled for early afternoon this coming Tuesday, at which time we will find out more about what the indictment itself says. This reporting that there may be as many as 30 counts, maybe focusing entirely upon particular things, particular events, particular entries, checks, transactions as a result of this hush money discovery and investigation. But could be other matters as well. So we'll wait and see what that is all about and how it is that the grand jury, again, this independent court-related body, has codified, if you will, again with the supervision and oversight of the DA, what it is that Donald Trump allegedly did in New York in connection with the violation of state law there. We also know, as a result of until very recently, the anticipated indictment, now we know the real indictment, that members of Congress, three in particular, some chairs of committees, have requested the Manhattan DA share with them all the information that the Manhattan DA has about this investigation, about the prosecution of Donald Trump. An outrageous request. They know it well. They know it's contrary to the rule of law. They know it's contrary to basic understanding of civics. We've got a federal legislative leaders, three of them in particular, asking a state prosecutor for discovery. Unprecedented, once again, in our history, will not happen, does not happen, arguably violative of the state law, if indeed the DA were to disclose that to the leadership of the Congress. But what is this story all about? We know, well, that Jim Jordan, who's the House Judiciary Chair, Oversight Chair James Comer, and Administrative Chair Brian Steele from right here in Wisconsin, had made this request to the DA, plainly for political purposes, to address their base, demanding to know what this investigation is all about, information about the charges against the former president, obviously. A lot of that going to be produced to the defendant's attorneys in the concept of what's called discovery post-arraignment. That will happen in the days and weeks and months ahead, but inappropriate for the congressmen, the chairs of these committees, to make that request. And sure enough, Alvin Bragg this week, just yesterday, sent back a missive to the three of them, telling them how wrong they are, how basically unfounded their allegation is. It plainly drawing a red line. He says, what neither Mr. Trump nor Congress may do is interfere with the ordinary course of proceedings in New York State. Exactly right. He goes on to say, he accuses the trio of improper and dangerous usurpation, and attempted interference with an ongoing state criminal investigation, warns them against unlawful political interference. He says this: the committee's attempted interference with an ongoing state criminal investigation and now prosecution is unprecedented and it is an illegitimate incursion on New York's sovereign interests. He's absolutely right about that. Moreover, and he's directing this again to Comer and Steele and Jordan, your examination of the facts of a single criminal investigation for the purpose of determining whether any charge against Mr. Trump are warranted is, and here we go, is an improper and dangerous usurpation of the executive and judicial functions, and lets them have it in this letter. Even worse, he says, based on your reportedly close collaboration with Mr. Trump in attacking this office, he means his own office, the DA in Manhattan, and the grand jury process. Again, we've talked about it this morning and in other settings. It appears, he says, that you are acting more like criminal defense counsel, trying to gather evidence for a client than a legislative body seeking to achieve a legitimate, underline legitimate legislative objective. Alvin Bragg pushing back, more than pushing back, on these three chairs of House committees, telling them they're wrong, civically uninformed. Maybe they do know. They do know how inappropriate this is, but doing this just for the purpose of sending messages and presuming that their constituents do not know. And that is perhaps the most offensive part of this of all, is that it's plainly premised, the requests themselves, premised upon the notion that we don't understand how this works, and that based upon that, we're simply making this political move in an attempt to bring up our own posture, our own position within our base, contemptible behavior. Alan Bragg having none of it this past week. Catherine is on the phone, calling in from Madison. Catherine, glad to have you with us this morning on Morning Cannolis.
Hi, James. Thank you very much for your show. I was calling because I wish you could just fill me in on what a typical time frame is on indictments like
Sure.
this. I'm pretty much unaware of it, and I'll just take your answer offline. So
Great.
Thank you.
Catherine, thanks so much for the call. It is a great question. And like all lawyers, I will tell you it depends somewhat upon what the judge does, both in the federal system and the New York system. There are things called speedy trial obligations. That is this notion that, justice delayed is justice denied, especially applicable in the criminal setting, where you want to make certain that frankly, for the state, for the people who have an interest in prosecutions, no less important, arguably more important for the defendant himself, herself, itself. You want to make certain that, again, under our Constitution, even the Constitution of the state of New York, that their rights are not trampled upon, that they're enforced. And that's the right to a speedy trial. So what happens is that on Tuesday, again, the former president will be arraigned. He'll plead presumably not guilty to the charges. And as I said before, the judge will set up a timeline. He can solicit from the attorneys for the prosecutors, the attorneys from the defendant, recommendations about how this should be done. Presumably months out, there will be the exchange of discovery. There will be allegations, of course, made along the way, maybe simply position statements at this point, not allegations yet, about discovery. And the posture, arguably, from the defense is going to be, this is very complex, going to require lots and lots and lots and lots of time. The judge probably will be hearing from the prosecutors as well and will say, you know what, Judge, if this is narrow to the hush money event, that yes, there are a lot of documents, yes, there are a lot of transactions, yes, there are a lot of witness statements to look through, but it's not the most complex case that we have ever seen in America. And for that reason, set these proceedings out for some period of time to give the defendants an adequate time to review all that discovery, to get a sense of what the information is. There's an obligation under what's called Brady in the federal system, generally under the state system as well, to disclose to the defense all of the information that is had, and that's where some of the allegations can come in. If the government doesn't do that, there could be allegations, motions filed to compel the production, to find that there were not disclosures of everything. That happens with some frequency. Likely that this judge will set a timetable again for the conduct of the disclosure of all of that discovery, and motions, once again, almost certainly be a motion to dismiss this prosecution. To dismiss the case, probably based upon some legal issues, maybe some factual issues as well. That is done on paper. The judge could have oral argument on that again as well. Could be other issues. Maybe there's some suppression motions that need to be filed about the evidence that's going to be presented as part of that discovery. All kinds of things can happen. All of that in the pretrial setting, and likely he will set a trial date. maybe on Tuesday, maybe at some point in the near future. My own estimate is that because of the high visibility nature of this, that trial date, unlikely to be in this calendar year, maybe not even the next calendar year. He may set it and it may be postponed multiple times. We have seen that happen. And again, in all those circumstances, a judge has to make a finding that it is in the interest of the defense, interest of the people, that the speedy trial obligations be extended, that the limitations on the postponements on that can in fact be suspended somewhat, but it's got to make findings about the interests of justice to do that. And so all of that depends upon the particular statements made by the parties, the complexity of this particular matter, the discovery produced, the motions and the hearings on those that are coming up. This is going to consume, at least from my estimate, 2, if not more years before we see a jury that is selected. Lots of issues to be raised there about the impaneling of a jury in America, in Manhattan. I think it can be done. People can decide cases based upon what they see in trial and not based upon what has been presented in the media. Great question. We'll be answering that in greater detail as this case plays out in the days and weeks and months, and yes, probably years ahead as well. Gene, calling in from Eau Claire. Glad to have you with us once again on this high news morning. Thanks, Gene.
I'm calling. I have comments on everything, but I'm just calling today to thank you so much from all of us who have been paying very close attention and explaining things for us and taking your time to educate us on all of these areas plus what we can do. So I just wanted to call and say thank you. Your show is invaluable. It is a wonderful show, and you're hitting all of the things that we all are caring about every single day. So thanks again, James. That's all I want to say. Thank you so much. We really greatly appreciate you. And you have a good weekend. Thank
Gene,
you.
Thanks so much for the call. I am flattered by that, and I like to think that hopefully we're doing some education here. I do it because of people like you, Gene, and other callers this morning, all thoughtful people who are engaged in America, engaged in these issues, reading the news and consuming the news and understanding it. It is my own background, obviously, as a former criminal prosecutor, a civil litigator. I still continue to do an awful lot of civil litigation to this day, a lot of speaking, a lot of teaching, a lot of presenting on these issues on a regular basis. I am honored, not only by your wonderful comments, Gene, this morning, but by this opportunity to spend some time on air doing what I can do based upon my background, my experience, to educate and to talk about these all-important issues. We also have another caller, so we appreciate very much those kinds of comments. Thank you so much. I am flattered, and I thank you for that very, very positive comment. We also have another caller on the line right now. Mark, why don't you go ahead with your comment, your question? Glad to have you with us also, Mark. And Mark, if you are there, you're calling in, I think, from Sussex, and glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep, thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
It's funny because you're, again, I'm going to preface this by saying that I was a Trump fan and I'm not a Trump fan anymore, but all of the BS that the Democrats have pulled against him, all of these fabricated, all of these conspiracy theories, it's just amazing. And again, I do not want him to be the Republican nominee, but again, has he been convicted of anything? Absolutely not. Does Joe Biden come out there and fabricate stuff every single day? Every single day I hear something new coming out of his mouth that is just a complete lie. But you never comment on that. Again, I want to say that I'm not a Trump fan any longer. But all of these conspiracy and all this crap, this is really bad for the United States, what happened this week.
And Mark, I appreciate the comment as always. That's why we take callers from all sides of the political aisle. Glad to have you with me this morning. Needless to say, I disagree with you, and that's a part of America too. I don't think that our discussion on these morning broadcasts is jaded. What I try to do is present the facts that are known. Try to indicate that again, reasonable people can interpret them differently, but the descriptions are always not fabricated. And I disagree with you with due respect that the things that our current president says are all lies and are all products of conspiracies. But we appreciate the comment, and that's what this broadcast and about America is generally. That's the First Amendment. That's what James Madison said we can do. And going forward, we will continue to take your calls and take those observations of others on all sides of the political aisle. I promised in this morning's broadcast we talk about a few other issues, again, anticipating more on the prosecution of Donald Trump down the road. Let's talk about a few of those other issues as we continue our discussion this morning. We know about the tremendously horrific environmental damage caused by a train derailment on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border a number of weeks back, spilling these hazardous chemicals into nearby creeks and rivers near East Palestine. We know about that, a huge event, and the company Norfolk Southern causing that, doing some things right now with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and its own entities to try to accomplish the cleanup, and all of those, again, a continuing focus of all of us in America, not just in that particular part of our nation. When we come back, I'm going to tell you what the U.S. Department of Justice is doing in response to that, also a part of the enforcement of the rule of law under the Clean Water Act, which we've talked about a lot. The Clean Water Act, important to the enforcement of our integrity. And come back, stay with us for that presentation, that discussion, and why it's important going ahead right here on our morning broadcast. This is our final segment this morning on Saturday, April 1 of Morning Cannolis. Before the break, talking about what the Department of Justice is now doing in connection with the horrific environmental damage caused by Norfolk Southern and its train derailment of a number of weeks ago in East Palestine. Just this past week, the Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing that it is seeking to hold the company accountable for what he describes as unlawfully polluting the nation's waterways and to ensure it pays the full cost of the environmental cleanup. A civil lawsuit brought by the Environmental and Natural Resources Division of Maine Justice, and again, an attempt to collect the fines, the costs of the cleanup, holding Norfolk Southern responsible for past and future costs in connection with that horrific event. Why is that important? Well, it's under the Clean Water Act. We know the Clean Water Act is also the subject of review right now by the U.S. Supreme Court in a case that we've talked a lot about, a case involving Sackett. That's the name of the case pending right now before the Supreme Court. More importantly, it underscores once again what good government does when it comes to enforcing the laws, the environmental laws, but ensuring that integrity is followed not only in the cleanup itself, but also in the financial parts of this. This is going to be plainly a huge cost imposed to clean up this environmental damage caused by this railroad disaster there in East Palestine. The Department of Justice, appropriately, rule of law, justice, government in action, suing the Norfolk Southern train company this past week to ensure that justice is done when it comes to that. I'm going to talk about one other important case also coming out of our federal courts just this past week, and that is that a federal judge in Texas who previously had addressed the legitimacy of the Affordable Care Act issued just this past week a very far-reaching ruling just on Thursday that prevents the Biden administration from enforcing a provision of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act, sometimes called Obamacare, that provides patients with certain types of free preventive care, and that's the key. Prevention, again, a major portion of the Affordable Care Act for 10 years in place, and that includes screenings for cancer and depression, diabetes, and HIV. The judge, his name is Reed O'Connor, Federal District Court, Northern District of Texas. The injunction, if you will, applies nationwide. And if it stands, again, the Department of Justice has already indicated it's going to appeal that ruling, could have some very far-reaching implications for millions of Americans out there, bringing the nation, again, back to the states, from my perspective, back to the days, rather, when, before the 2010 law, when insurers were free to decide which preventive services they would cover. Now, even though the injunction takes effect immediately, the review from most insurers is that this decision would not have any immediate impact upon people's coverage, making clear that Americans should have some peace of mind that there'll be no immediate disruption in care or coverage. Still, there could be some significant changes over time. And the fact that we've got a federal judge out there declaring this portion of the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional is very significant, again, focusing on the preventive aspects of it. The decision undeniably introduces uncertainty into the future of this portion of our healthcare system, again, upon which people have relied to access preventive care with no out-of-pocket costs for many, many years. And beyond that, it underscores once again the importance of good legislation, which we have had, and the role that our courts play in interpreting this. Now, undeniably, as I said, the Department of Justice is going to be appealing this order. It does not, as an important aspect, doesn't, like some of the previous challenges, undermine completely the entire structure of the Affordable Care Act, but certainly places a challenge in the wake of this decision to the provision of preventive options and preventive care going forward. And so even though this was not particularly a surprise coming from this judge, he had previously ruled that some portions of the Affordable Care Act are violated the Constitution, still comes, as we all know, a week after the 13th anniversary of the Affordable Care Act, the signing of it by President Obama in 2012. And so it's significant not only in timing, but also in terms of the future of that. We'll look forward to hearing more about the appeal of that very major decision down the road, and also talking about the role of the federal judiciary in deciding these major issues that have tremendous impacts upon the healthcare and other aspects of our lives in America. We have a couple more callers in our last minutes. We're going to take those callers on this Saturday, April 1. First, Tom calling in from West Dallas. Tom, your comment or question on this good Saturday morning.
To you. Thank you for your show. I look forward to this every Saturday morning.
Great, Tom. Thanks so much.
My question is for the last topic. If it's going to take a year or two for this case to get through the courts for Trump, what about him running? And God forbid that he would get elected again and this case isn't done. What does he then get executive privilege again, or how does that work?
All right, Tom, you have pointed your finger, I think, at one of the major questions and concerns that is out there. I'm going to spend a little time talking about that, and I'm taking a note here also, Tom, because that's the kind of thing that, especially after we hear the schedule next week, I'm going to revisit next week as well. But the short answer here on this Saturday morning is just this. Your point is so well taken. It is going to take a very long time for this case to go to trial. Understand also that even assuming that there is a conviction sometime in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know, far down the road, likely an appeal to the appeals court as well, could ultimately go to the Supreme Court. So it would be a long period of time. During that period of time, Tom, your very good question, is there any prohibition on him or anyone else running for elective office? The answer is no. Under the Constitution, just these three obligations, including residency and natural-born citizenship and the age of 35, he can continue to run for office, the highest office in our land, even while in New York, and arguably our other places, could be in Georgia, could be in Washington, D.C., if there are federal charges at some point. All of that can take place while he is at the same time running for the presidency. Going to be a fascinating time in this year and in next year, especially 2024. Highly unlikely this is going to be resolved anytime. And going back and forth, if you will, from the campaign trail and the interconnection between that and a major political candidate running for office, the importance of that, the significance of that, the unprecedented nature of that, Tom, cannot be overstated. Nothing prohibiting him from doing it. I'll leave you with even this additional thought. if he is convicted, there's actually nothing in the Constitution that prevents him from even taking office. There is the 14th Amendment that talks about insurrectionist behavior. We will talk about that more in the future, but the Constitution doesn't talk about this. Why? Because once again, Tom, we are going down an unprecedented path. Thanks so much for that call. Thank all of my callers this morning for their wonderfully insightful and engaging questions and comments. We'll take more of that next week here on Morning Cannolis. Join us for next week's engagement on issues of law, government, and that all-important aspiration for justice in these United States of America. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.